On December 16, 1976, the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union urgently issued a decree that overturned the entire history of Soviet helicopter construction. Moreover, the reason for this decree was not some internal analysis or a report from generals about a lack of equipment. The reason was a statement by the Americans. Just 6 days earlier, on December 10th, United States Secretary of the Army, Martin Hoffman, announced to the world that the winner of the competition for a promising attack helicopter was a prototype from the Hughes Company, which the whole world would later know under the name Apache, a machine specifically created for hunting tanks and destroying armored vehicles on the battlefield. The Soviet leadership understood instantly. If America gets such a helicopter, the Soviet Union must have a worthy response, and it must appear quickly. The order to develop a new attack helicopter was given without hesitation to the MIL Design Bureau. This was logical and predictable because it was the MIL team that created the Mi-24, which by that time was already in service and was considered the main striking force of Army aviation. The MIL Bureau was huge, influential, and accustomed to the fact that all major orders for ground-based helicopters went to them. The Kamov Design Bureau traditionally dealt with naval machines, and no one particularly invited the Kamov team to ground-based themes. But the Kamov team had their own opinion on this matter. The fact is that even during the lifetime of Nikolai Ilyich Kamov, his bureau tried to offer the military a ground version of the Ka-25 naval helicopter when the development of the future Mi-24 was underway in the 60s. Then the ground command was entirely enchanted by the MIL concept of a flying infantry fighting vehicle, and the Kamov proposal did not even reach the prototype stage. Now, when it came to a fundamentally new machine, the Kamov team decided they had no right to miss such a chance a second time. In 1978, a scene occurred that looked more like an episode from a spy movie than a real story of the Soviet defense industry. The leading designer of the promising Kamov machine, which then bore the index 580, Yevgeny Vasilyevich Sudarev, learned that in the building of the MIL Design Bureau on that day, a model of the future Mi-28 would be shown to military representatives, and he decided on an adventure that could have cost him his career. Sudarev took a model of his V-80 and deceitfully smuggled it through the security post of the MIL Design Bureau straight into the competitor's lair, right to the presentation of someone else's helicopter. When the MIL team saw a Kamov designer within their walls with a model of an enemy machine, a real scandal broke out. The MIL Bureau in those days was so powerful that it seriously considered the possibility of a complete takeover of the Kamov Design Bureau. And the appearance of the Kamov team on their territory with a competing project was perceived as unheard-of audacity. But the military personnel present at the show turned out to be more objective. They looked at both models, and they liked the Kamov machine. Small, predatory, without a tail rotor, with a coaxial scheme for the arrangement of the main rotors. It looked like something fundamentally new, unlike anything the Soviet Army had seen before. After this incident, long negotiations began at the highest levels. The military leadership understood that both projects had their strengths, and choosing between them just by eye would be wrong. On December 2, 1980, the command of the ground forces and the command of the Air Force made a joint decision that changed the rules of the game. They decided to choose the new combat helicopter on a competitive basis, and unified tactical and technical requirements were issued for both machines. The content of these requirements had already been influenced by the experience of the first year of the war in Afghanistan, which by that time was in full swing, and every day gave the military new food for thought about what exactly a real combat helicopter should be. The Kamov team worked rapidly. By the spring of 1981, the V-80 already existed in the form of a full-scale physical mock-up, and at the beginning of '82, the construction of the first flying specimen began. And on June 17, 1982, in the last of the Brezhnev years, test pilot Nikolai Pavlovich Bezdetnov lifted this machine off the ground for the first time. The helicopter, which 2 years earlier did not even exist in the form of drawings, took to the air and began its long and dramatic history, full of victories, disasters, betrayals, and injustice. When the V-80 began to rise into the sky over the Zhulebino airfield near Moscow, a serious problem arose for the Kamov team. The machine was secret, but the test flights took place not somewhere in a closed steppe, but practically next to Moscow, where any accidental observer could discern the unusual silhouette of the new helicopter. And then the designers came up with an elegant trick. On the side of the V-80, they painted fake windows and doors, sticking on shiny strips that imitated the glazing of a passenger cabin. The calculation was simple. From the side, the helicopter was supposed to look like another civilian machine of the Kamov Bureau, some kind of transport or passenger prototype of no interest to foreign intelligence services. The trick worked brilliantly. American intelligence, receiving fragmentary information and blurry photographs, described this helicopter completely incorrectly until 1986. In Western aviation magazines, the V-80, which received the code designation Hokum from the Americans, was confidently called a two-seat machine with a tandem arrangement of the pilot and weapons operator. That is, they attributed to it the very layout that its competitor, the Mi-28, actually had. The Kamov helicopter was in fact a single-seater, and this was one of its key features. But the Americans did not even suspect this. However, the camouflage also brought an unpleasant surprise. During one of the test flights, a shiny sticker imitating a window pane on the left side tore off the fuselage and flew straight into the engine air intake. The engine stopped, and the pilot had to continue the flight in emergency mode on one operating engine. In essence, the camouflage set up an unplanned test, which, however, the machine passed. The helicopter landed safely, and the Kamov team received confirmation that their aircraft was capable of flying on a single power plant as well. Meanwhile, data on the flight characteristics of the V-80 were accumulating, and they were impressive. The coaxial scheme, in which two main rotors rotate on a single axis in opposite directions, gave huge advantages. The absence of a tail rotor and its bulky drive meant that the helicopter was lighter than its competitor, and all engine power went toward creating lift and thrust rather than being wasted on compensating for reactive torque. The maximum speed of the V-80 was 315 kilometers per hour, while the Mi-28 accelerated only to 282. But even more important was the maneuverability. The turn rate of the Kamov machine exceeded the speed of the movable cannon mount installed on the Mi-28. This meant that the V-80 could turn toward a target faster than the gun of the MiL helicopter could manage to aim at that target. In October 1983, a joint meeting of the Air Force Command and the board of the Ministry of Aviation Industry took place. The main question was at stake: which of the two machines should be launched into mass production? Supporters of the Mi-28 argued that a two-seat machine is more effective in using weapons, that two crew members find and hit targets faster, and that it is simply impossible for one pilot to simultaneously fly the helicopter and fire. The argument sounded convincing, and it seemed that this very point would outweigh all the speed and maneuverability advantages of the Kamov aircraft. But then Colonel Grigory Ivanovich Kuznetsov, a representative of the Air Force Research Institute, took the floor. His report turned out to be a real bombshell. Kuznetsov stated that based on real combat experience using Mi-24 helicopters in Afghanistan, all functions of searching for and destroying targets are performed by the pilot, while the operator in most cases does not participate in this process at all. To put it simply, the second crew member, for whose sake the MiL team increased the size and weight of their machine, turned out to be useless cargo in a real battle. The Afghan War, which by that time had been going on for 4 years, provided invaluable statistics, and these statistics spoke in favor of a single-seat machine. Chief Marshal of Aviation, Pavel Stepanovich Kutakov, commander of the Air Force of the Soviet Union, presided over that meeting. After listening to all the reports and arguments from both sides, Kutakov made a decision. Victory in the competition is awarded to the Kamov VIF-80 helicopter. For the Kamov team, it was a triumph. For the Mil team, a blow they did not intend to accept. And they did not accept it. Already in February 1984, the Ministry of Aviation Industry, contrary to the military decision, authorized the production of a pilot batch of Mi-28. The losers of the competition used their powerful connections in industrial circles, and the machine the Army did not choose continued to be built anyway. And on December 3rd of that same year, 84, an event occurred that affected the Kamov team in the most tragic way. Suddenly, Marshal Kutakov died, the very man who, by his authority, had approved the victory of the V-80. With his passing, the Kamov helicopter lost its most powerful patron. The Mil team immediately took advantage of the situation and achieved repeat comparative tests. The competition, which the Kamov team had already won, essentially started all over again. The repeat comparative tests achieved by the Mil team took place in the presence of a high military commission. Both sides understood that everything was at stake. The loser loses not just a contract, but an entire direction of development for decades to pass. The Kamov team brought their V-80 to the tests, and the Mil team brought a fresh Mi-28 from the pilot batch, the production of which they had secured despite the results of the previous competition. The pilots of both machines prepared to show everything their helicopters were capable of, and among the Kamov pilots was Yevgeny Ivanovich Laryushin, one of the best test pilots in the country. Laryushin decided to demonstrate to the commission a tactical maneuver that was perfectly suited for real combat. The essence of the maneuver was as follows. The helicopter hides behind a natural obstacle, then suddenly pops up, fires a volley at the enemy, and immediately dives back behind cover. In real combat conditions, such a tactic would allow attacking enemy armored vehicles while remaining practically invulnerable to return fire. Laryushin began to perform this maneuver. The helicopter soared upward sharply, and the spectator saw the powerful machine hover over the obstacle for a moment. Then a simulated volley followed, and Laryushin pulled the control stick toward himself, throwing the helicopter into a swift dive downward. At that moment, a disaster occurred. When the V-80 dove down sharply, multi-directional aerodynamic forces began to act on the upper and lower main rotors. During such a sharp maneuver, the rotation planes of the two rotors, which are separated by a safe distance in normal flight, dangerously approached each other. The blades of the upper rotor collided with the blades of the lower one. The impact was terrifying. Both rotors were instantly destroyed, and the helicopter, deprived of its lifting surfaces, fell to the ground like a stone. Test pilot Yevgeny Ivanovich Laryushin died. For the Kamov Bureau, this was a disaster in every sense of the word. They lost a brilliant pilot and the only flying prototype at that time. And their competitors from the Mil Design Bureau received the most powerful argument for closing the V-80 project once and for all. The coaxial scheme, which gave the helicopter all its outstanding characteristics, proved vulnerable in exactly the mode for which the combat machine was created, the mode of sharp maneuvering near the ground. The blade collision was not just a technical failure, it was a fundamental design flaw, and everyone knew it. Many in the aviation industry and in the Air Force Command were sure that the V-80 program was over, but the Kamov team did not give up. Designers rapidly analyzed the causes of the crash and found a solution: to increase the distance between the upper and lower rotors, separating their rotation planes enough so that even during the sharpest maneuvers, a strike became physically impossible. The modification was completed in the shortest possible time, and the Kamov team declared their readiness to continue testing. Their determination impressed the military, and the program was not closed. Comparative tests resumed in September 1985. This time, the Kamov helicopter with the modified rotor design demonstrated everything required of it and did so confidently. The machine performed the most complex maneuvers, showed superiority in speed and maneuverability, and based on the results of the full test cycle, the Kamov aircraft won a convincing victory over the Mi-28. For the second time in a row, military experts recognized the V-80 as the best. And for the second time in a row, this result did not immediately turn into a real decision. Months of bureaucratic approvals dragged on. The industrial lobby standing behind the Mill Bureau did not want to retreat and delayed the formalization of the competition results by all available means. It was already 86, then 87. Perestroika was raging in the country. Leaders of ministries and departments were changing, and official recognition of the Kamov helicopter's victory was delayed again and again. Only in December 1987, more than 2 years after the end of the tests, was the victory of the Kamov 580 finally officially recorded by a joint decree of the Central Committee of the Communist Party and the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union. More than 5 years had passed from the first flight of the prototype to this moment. It seemed that now the Kamov team could finally breathe a sigh of relief and begin mass production of their machine. But the Soviet Union of the late 80s was no longer the same state that in '76, 6 days after the American statement, issued a decree on the development of a new helicopter. The economy was bursting at the seams. Funding for defense programs was being cut rapidly, and the mass production that the Kamov team had dreamed of all this time turned out to be not at all what they expected. The first production V-80 came off the line of the Ukhtomsky helicopter plant in March 1989. It would seem that the long-awaited moment had arrived. The conveyor belt had started working, and the Army was about to begin receiving new combat machines by the dozens. But the reality turned out to be cruel. The second specimen of the series was built only in April 1990, that is, 13 months after the first. 1 helicopter per year. This was the pace at which the defense industry of a crumbling country was capable of producing a machine that had twice won in competitive tests. After this, it was decided to move production to the helicopter plant in the far eastern city of Arsenyev, where capacities were larger and where they hoped to establish a more regular output. The first helicopter of the Arsenyev assembly was ready in May 1991, but there was still no talk of mass production. The Soviet Union was living out its last months, and with it, all previous plans for rearming the army were falling apart. In January 1992, an event occurred that was unique in itself for the domestic defense industry. The chief designer of the Kamov Bureau, Sergei Viktorovich Mikheyev, spoke at an international symposium in London and for the first time publicly announced the new index of the machine, K-50. Until that moment, the helicopter had been known only by its restricted designation, V-80, and now the whole world learned its real name. The machine was shown to the general public 7 months later in August '92 at the air show in Zhukovsky, which was then called Mos Aero Show. The helicopter caused a sensation, and a month later it was taken even further to the famous Farnborough Air Show in England, where the K-50 was among the best new products in world helicopter construction. But the most powerful promotional campaign for the Kamov helicopter was not an air show, but a feature film. In 1993, a movie titled Black Shark was released on screens, and this name stuck to the K-50 forever. The film told of the combat use of the helicopter in Afghanistan, and the uniqueness of this picture was that not only the helicopter played itself, but also the pilot who flew it, as well as the chief designer Mikheyev himself. For millions of viewers, the K-50 turned from a faceless military index into a living legend, into a black shark, a predatory and invulnerable combat machine, the mere sight of which was supposed to make an enemy's blood run cold. The film's popularity created an aura around the helicopter that was difficult to overstate. In conditions where money for the defense industry was catastrophically lacking, and helicopters were produced literally piece by piece, public interest in the machine was almost the only trump card the Kamov team had left, and this trump card worked. On August 28, 1995, by decree of President Yeltsin, the K-50 helicopter was officially adopted for service by the Russian Army. 13 years passed from the moment of the prototype's first flight to this decree, and in all those years only a few machines had been built. Production rates remained depressing. The Arsenyev plant assembled an average of 1 helicopter per year, and accumulating any noticeable number of combat machines at such rates was simply impossible. The Army formally had a state-of-the-art attack helicopter in service, but in reality, these helicopters could be counted on one's fingers. The K-50 risked remaining a beautiful, expensive toy shown at air shows and in movies, but never entering a real battle. And then, at the very end of 1999, the situation in the North Caucasus escalated to the limit. The Second Chechen War was in full swing, and the command decided to send 2 K-50 helicopters to the combat zone. This was the first and, in fact, only real combat baptism of the Black Shark. 2 helicopters arrived in Chechnya, and from the 1st to the 29th of January, 2000, took part in real combat operations. For the first time, the Kamov machine worked not on targets at a training ground, but on a real enemy. And every flight gave invaluable information about what this machine was capable of in real war conditions. During the 29 days of the combat mission, both K-50 helicopters worked with a full load. Pilots flew out on missions several times a day, striking fortified positions of militants, destroying firing points, and supporting the offensive of ground units. During this brief but intense combat practice, the 2 helicopters collectively used 929 unguided rockets and 3 guided missiles. The figures spoke for themselves. The machines worked at the limit of their capabilities, and the pilots were delighted with how the Black Shark behaved in real combat conditions. However, the combat baptism also revealed the helicopter's vulnerability. After one of the flights, the pilot of one of the 2 machines complained of unusual vibration. The helicopter was inspected right at the Khankala airfield, which in those days served as the main base for federal aviation in Chechnya. During the inspection, a bullet hole was found in one of the main rotor blades. The blade was damaged by fire from the ground, and although the helicopter managed to return safely to base, continuing combat flights with such a damaged blade was impossible. They did not change the blade in field conditions at Khankala. There was no equipment or spare parts for this, and the entire helicopter was sent back to the plant in Arsenyev. Thus, one of the 2 K-50 helicopters ended its Chechen mission early, and with it, practically the entire combat career of the Black Shark also ended. The pilots who flew the K-50 in Chechnya gave the machine the highest marks. The helicopter was fast, obedient in control, had excellent maneuverability at low altitudes, and allowed one pilot to effectively both search for targets and hit them. Everything Colonel Kuznetsov had said at the meeting in '83 was confirmed in real combat 17 years later. The single-seat concept, in which many did not believe, worked exactly as the Kamov designers intended. But these positive reviews from active-duty pilots did not become the deciding argument in the fate of the helicopter. The leadership of the Ministry of Defense stubbornly refused to recognize the K-50 as the primary combat helicopter of the Russian Army. The main argument remained the machine's single-seat layout, which officials in high offices considered a disadvantage despite all the test results and combat use. Meanwhile, the Mil Design Bureau continued to improve its Mi-28, the development of which by that time had stretched over 3 decades. From the Mi-28, the Mi-28N modification was slowly but surely growing, equipped with a mast-mounted radar station and capable of operating at any time of day and in any weather conditions. The 2000s passed, and Kamov helicopters were still being assembled piece by piece in Arsenyev. Every new specimen cost huge amounts of money. Mass production was never established, and the entire batch of produced machines remained so small that there was no question of any mass rearming of helicopter regiments. The Mi-28N, in contrast, was being prepared for launch into a large series at the Rostov helicopter plant, whose capacities allowed for the production of dozens of machines annually. The scale of production ultimately turned out to be the factor that outweighed all the flight advantages of the Black Shark. In 2009, after the production of only 16 specimens, production of the K-50 was officially terminated. 16 machines in 20 years of mass production. This is the sum of the fate of the helicopter that twice won in competitive tests, which went through the death of a test pilot and was resurrected, which starred in its own movie and earned rave reviews from combat pilots. The Mi-28N was adopted into service by the Russian Army as the primary attack helicopter, the very competitor that the Kamov machine had beaten time and again in fair competition. However, the Black Shark did not disappear without a trace. Already in 1997, a two-seat descendant of the K-50 appeared, which took from its ancestor the coaxial scheme, the predatory silhouette, and outstanding maneuverability, but at the same time received a second crew member, which military officials so persistently demanded. This descendant in the second decade of the 21st century, unexpectedly for many, began to enter active helicopter units. And its story deserves a separate account. If you like this story, give it a like and write in the comments what you think about the fate of the Black Shark. Was the decision to abandon the K-50 in favor of the Mi-28 fair? Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new episodes. There are many more interesting stories ahead about the technology created by our designers.